Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and welcome to this comprehensive tutorial on building a URL shortener, and we are going to name this project as trim URL. So to build this shortener service, we are going to make use of .NET and Angular. So for the .NET we are going to use .NET version 9, and for the Angular we are going to use the latest version. I think currently it is 19.2. So if you don't know me, then I am Shashi and a full stack developer having over 6 years of experience in .NET and other JavaScript framework. So this trim URL application is going to be something similar what you guys have already know. There is something called as this bit.ly. You can see here, right? So whatever link you give, and you can just get a short URL of it, or maybe something called as URL Shortener, which is this tiny URL. So we are going to build something similar what you see, right? So I have already developed this application, but I'm going to teach you guys how you can build the same application using .NET and Angular. So just to give you a quick understanding, so what does that really mean? So if I go ahead and add any long URL, like for example, I have my own portfolio website. Suppose this is the one, shashikumar.dev, and if I click on this trim URL, this will go ahead and trim the URL and it will give me a shorter version of it. So currently it is on localhost, but you guys can deploy it and then you can make the link quite shorter with this particular unique URL code. So if I go ahead and copy this, so if I go back to this new tab and if I open it here, so can you see, right, whenever I'm going to that particular URL, it is redirecting me to the long URL which was shashikumar.dev and portfolio website. Okay, so this is what we are going to build in this today's video. And just to show you some more feature about this, so there is something called as dashboard. If you click on this dashboard, you will be redirected to this particular page where you can find all your shortened URL. Okay, so if you see here, I already have shashikumar.dev. Here you can see, right, and I can click on this short URL from here as well, and this should be handled by majorly admins, right? This also has a pagination implemented. So here you can see we have this paginated response, and also we have a search on the top, and this pagination and search, they both are server side. Okay, so if I search something about a new URL, something like that, can you see keyword matches, and based on that keyword I am able to filter the record. So this is what we are going to build in this today's video. So before we dive into the coding, so let's understand the architecture of our application. So we are going to follow a clean modular design that separates the concern and allow for the scalability, right? So if you see on the left, we have a front-end application. We will be using Angular, Tailwind CSS, and Signal for the state management. And then we have this backend API layer, which is built using .NET, where we will be using the minimal API, and there will be also a Carter. This is going to be a package which is going to help us to create those particular modules. And then majorly we will be developing these three endpoints, one for the redirection, one for the URL shortening, and another one for the analytics. So we will try to follow the clean architecture principle with the proper separation of concern. And talking about the data layer, so we will be using the Neon PostgreSQL, which is free to use for 500 MB, and I think that will be more than enough for us. And there will be a EF core, which will be nothing but your ORM, so that this will help us to fetch the things from the database, right? And there will be one layer of a repository, and nothing but it is also called as a repository pattern. So we will also put it there so that we are fetching the record from the repository and we will be sending it to the service and then to the particular minimal API endpoint. So this is what it is going to be our architecture overview, right? So here you can see we have this HTTP RESTful call so that your front end is able to call your backend APIs, and here we have the EF core which will be helping us to do or basically fetch the record from the database. So if you have already understand this part, then this is the right time for us to start with the API development. So to start with the development, what I have created a web API project using Rider. And if you are using Visual Studio, so you can still do that. You just have to follow some steps to create a web API template, right? And the name of our project is trim URL API. And this is how the API structure will look like when you have created a new project. So let me go ahead and start this application. So if you see, I'm using this HTTPS one, and my application is already running on this 7212 port. And if I try to click open this, so this will open up this particular tab, and here you can see, right, my API is running, but there is no endpoint, so that's why it is giving us 4. But let me go ahead and check if we have the weather API thing. So if I go inside this program file, here I can see I have this endpoint ready, and just to test that if everything is working fine, I will go ahead and just try to fetch this, and I can see that I have my response here because we are trying to do this get call to this weather forecast. Now if you're using a .NET 8 project, then you will already have a API endpoint by using Swagger, so you can test your API endpoints with those Swagger UI. But now with the .NET 9, if I show you here, if you go in the program.cs file, here you can see that we are using this add open API, which is coming from the Microsoft. And you can see also here that if it is in development mode, then you are using this app.map open API, right? So which means there is already a support for API documentation is given by Microsoft team. And to access that API endpoint, what you need to do, just go to your application and you just have to go to the open API /v1.json, and the moment you do that, you can find your API documentation here. So here you can see that you have this API endpoint weather forecast, you have proper tags and everything, right? What is the request, response, and all of those. So now you must have a question like, what if, Shashi, I want to use Swagger again, or maybe is there any other alternative for API documentation? So the answer to that is yes. So the two options what we have is, the first one is Swagger UI, what you see here, the old school what we were getting till .NET 8. And the another good option is Scalar. So this is what you have. So you can either go with the Scalar or you can go with the Swagger endpoint. So let me show you both the ways how you can add Swagger UI and Scalar. Right, so to add those things, you need to go to your NuGet package and you can just go ahead and search for Swagger UI, and you can get some options here, and you need to get this one, /ASP.NET Core Swagger UI. So this is 8.1.1. so let's go ahead and install it for our project. And for Scalar, you need to search for Scalar, and you can find this scalar.asp.NET Core. And I will be going with the latest version, so go ahead and install it in the project as well. So now both of them are installed. So now what I can do, right, just below this I can use app.u Swagger UI, right? And in this UI I can say options, and inside the option you just have to specify that option.swagger endpoint, and this is where you can put your Swagger. So this is the old way, right, how we were doing it. So now what we need to do, we have open API /v1, right, v1.json, what we have used from this add open API, right? And here you can give any name to it, right? So this is the first way by which you can add a Swagger endpoint. And another way was by using the Scalar. So for that you just need to specify app.map Scalar. So this is what the map Scalar API reference is. Once you add this, and that's all, you don't need to specify all this URL what you have did for Swagger, right? So this is more straightforward, same like what .NET has given to us, like map open API. So once I save this, and let me go ahead and stop the application and restart this, and let's go back to the browser. So now what I need to do here, we just need to say here Swagger, and the moment you do that, can you see you are able to again see the same URL, right? So this v1 is nothing but the name what you have specified, and here is your API endpoint which you can go ahead and try it on at, and you can test them, and this is easy, right? And now for the Scalar, what you need to do, right? So you just have to remove this, and you have to say Scalar / the v1, right? And the moment you do that, here you can see that you have your API endpoint, and here you can see you have much more details here as compared to the Swagger. And you also get some bunch of option, right? You can directly get the curl from here, or you need any kind of service, like for example if you need to do with the C#, Java, HTTP client from Dart, or maybe if you need to test it in the Go service, everything can be done now. And you can get a boilerplate code as well, like what you need to use and how you can basically fetch this particular endpoint. And another thing here, this is quite well separated, like here you can see your model as well, right? So what model you have, the data types and everything. So just in case if you want to test this, so you can just click on this test request, and if you click on this send, you will be able to see the response here as well, all sort of detail, for example the request header, the response header and everything. So now we have a proper API documentation things done. So now let's start with the folder structure of our project. So our backend is organized into several key components. Like the first thing is going to be our model. So let me create the folder models. Then we will have the second directory which is going to be DTO. The third one is going to be our modules. The second last is going to be our services, and the last one is going to be our persistence. So let's now start with the models, and we are going to create our first model. This is going to be a C# class, and the class name is going to be a URL. So this URL will consist of something called as ID, the long URL, the URL code, and there will be a created at, like at what time this URL was created. And if you remember our architecture diagram, we also have something called as analytics, where we are going to persist the like how many times that URL was clicked, right? So for that we are also going to create another class which is going to be your analytics service, sorry not service, the analytic class. Let's create that analytics, right? And inside this class there will be again some bunch of properties, which is nothing but your ID, the click time, like what time this was URL was clicked, and the URL code. And now here we need to somehow try to establish a relationship between this URL and analytics, which means that this one URL will have some bunch of analytics, which is nothing but your one-to-many relationship. So for that, let me go ahead and add this particular line. So now here we have this URL, and where you will be having the list of analytics, right? So this is one-to-many, but this will not work out of the box. You need to add a few property here. So to establish the one-to-many relationship, so here you need to add the foreign key, which is nothing but it's going to be your URL ID, and your navigation property, which is your URL, which you just have created, right? And now I can say that my model is ready, where I have URL class and then I have a analytic class. So now I can say the model is ready. Now we have to somehow create our data layer. So first thing first, we are going to need this Neon PostgreSQL, right? So that we can get the database URL from there, and that we can use it in our application. So to do the setup, right, we will be required to go on this website neon.tech, and over here you just need to create a new account, and you have to, once the account is created, so here you can see this is free to use, and you will be getting this 0.5 GB. And as I told you, this is going to be more than enough for you to create such project, right? So now I have to create a project. So let me go ahead and click that. So I can give a project name here as maybe I can create my own for white YouTube, right? So I can create a YouTube project, and I will be using Postgre 17, and the database name will be trim URL DB, something like this. And here you have option to choose the services. Either you can go with AWS or Azure. So right, so I will be going with this AWS one, and I'll click on this create. So here you can see, right, once you create it, it can see this is now active here, right? So this is active, and I'm going with this. So here the good thing about this NeonDB, they give you some different branches for your testing purpose, but here I'm directly going with the production one because this is just a tutorial video, and I will be deleting it later on, so that whatever URL you will see here, the connection string, that will be deleted in future, so that nobody can use that. So now we have to connect to our database. So for that, because you need to have a connection string, right? So let me click on this connect, and here I can see that I have my connection string ready, and this connection string I will have to use it inside my .NET project. So let me copy this and go inside my .NET project, and in the app setting, what I'll do, right, just below this, I will be having something called as connection string, and inside the connection string I will use this default connection, and I'm going to replace it with my Neon Postgre, right? This is what I have already created, and here you can see the URL is ready here, basically the connection string. And once I save the changes, which means now I am allowed to add any record to that particular instance what you have just now started, right? So over here, whenever you create anything, you will be having your table, right? So currently we don't have any table, so you won't find anything here for this DB, but once we will create the database and all the models, we will push it to the database. And how to push all of those, so there is a guy who will be helping us to do it, and that guy name is nothing but your EF core. So EF core is your ORM, which will help you to map your models to the database. And if you ask me what are models are nothing but what you just have created, which means by using entity framework, we will be mapping all these models to the database. So for that, we need to install few NuGet packages. So you just need to go ahead and search for Microsoft.Entity Framework Core, and you need this first package. So let me go ahead and install it in my application. The second thing you need is this efcore.tools. Let's go and install this as well. Then maybe I can also get this design form, and let me go ahead and do that as well. And one last thing you will require is something for the Postgre, right? So you just need to search for npg SQL, yeah, something like this. And this is what you need to install, and click on this plus button if you're using Swagger, not Swagger, if you're using Rider, and if you're using Visual Studio, then you already know how to do that. If not, then you can Google and you can find your answer. So the most important thing is you should have these packages before you start with the next step. So if you see, we have efcore.design, efcore.tools, and this npg SQL, efcore.postgresql. So now to start with the mapping, what I will be doing, so let me close this, and inside the persistent, I'm going to create a new folder, and this is going to be nothing but my content, right? So let's go ahead and create a new C# class, and this is going to be your DB content. So we can say trim trim URL db context. Okay, and just hit enter. Now you need to make use of db context. So if you remember, right, we are now using primary constructor. Basically you will have to inject this particular class db context option, and if you see, it is coming from Microsoft.entity framework core, which we have just now installed, and inside that you need to pass your trim URL db context, and this is nothing but is going to be your options, and this option you need to pass it to the base, and your base is nothing but your db context. Okay, so now once this is done, so what you need to do, you have to create the db set. So for that you need to do it for two models, right? So the first model is nothing but your db set URL, and you need to import this from the model folder. See, trim URL API dot. The second one is the analytics one. So let me go ahead and add that as well just below that. So now your DB set is done. Now the next step, what you have to write the entity configuration. For that you need to have the protected override void this on model creating. Okay, and inside that you have this model builder class, and this is nothing but your model builder. So here you can specify all your primary key. Like for example, you have this model builder dot entity. You can specify your entity, which is URL, and with this you can say has key, and then this entity you can just say e dot your id. This is nothing but is going to be your primary. Now here if you want, you can do something like this just to make these fields are required, but this code is going to be redundant, because if you go inside your model, so here you can see you have already added this required. So if you just want to make this as well required, so what you can just say, you can just put this required here, and you don't need to specify all of this inside your entity configuration. I can just get rid of this. Same thing if you want to specify for the analytics, so you can do the same thing here. You just need to add here as analytics, and this also has a key, and this is going to make it as a primary. And just to make sure that if you have already added the required field, so you can take a look at here that, and if you want to make this also required, so you can already do it from, okay, something like. Now if you want to add a db level uniqueness for this particular URL code, so that also you can do, basically not for analytics but something for this URL code. So for example, you want that this URL code should always be unique, so that configuration you can do it just below here, and you just need to say that model builder dot entity. You need to again specify the entity, which is your URL, and then you can just say dot has index. So I'm just trying to put this index because this is going to be a unique one. So this is your e dot URL code, and then you can just add your that is unique. Now if you want to remember that we have added a relationship, so we can do that here as well. So here you need to add the relationship. So what I can do, right, so there was a relationship what we have added. Let me go back here, and you need to add the relationship like this. So for example, you have this entity URL, you can get rid of this. Let me put some enter, and let me keep it separated. Okay, so you have this URL, and now you can say dot has many. Basically your URL will have many analytics, right, and you will have many with one. Okay, and what is that one? Your one is nothing but your particular URL model, and here you can also specify that what is your foreign key. Your foreign key is nothing but this URL ID, and let me just make this better so that it good readable. So this is how you have created the relationship by using this particular model build. And once you have done till here, so I can see that your entity configuration is also done, and now you are ready to map your models, which is your DB sets, to the database. But before that, just make sure to configure that in the program.cs file. And to do that, what we can do, we can just go here, maybe just above this builder, we can say builder.services.add db context, right? And you need to specify your db context, what you have created. For us, it is trim URL db context. And here we can just say options, and this is what I wanted to use, which AI has already given. So let me go back. I think this is not the one. So let me put it opt.np, or this is use np. Yes, this is the one what I was looking for. And here I can just need to add my connection string. If you see, right, this is what this guy expects. So to add this connection string, we are going to get it from the app setting.json. So to get that, we have this builder.configuration.get connection string, and we need to specify the name which we have given it over here inside the app setting.json. This is what the default connection. So make sure that this one is matching with this, right? And once you do that, right, your connection is been established at this particular, because of this particular code. And once this is done, this is going to take a look at this trim URL DB context, and it is going to map all of this to your database. And to do that magic, it is not going to happen automatically. You are going to make use of some commands to go ahead and add the migrations. So as I am using the CLI way, so that's what I'm going to write the command as .NET EF. I will say say migrations, and I need to add. So once you click on this add, here you can specify that name of your particular migration. So let me just go ahead and say add initial create and hit enter. And now as you see, right, because we are not in the project, so that's why it says that hey, you just cannot do that. So let me go inside the project, trim URL API, or you could have used the flag, right? So if you space, you can also put this hyphen project and you can give the project name. But I went inside the project and now I'm trying to run the command, and this time it should work. So the build has been started, the build was success, and can you see, right, once you add this, so there will be a migration folder got created, and here you can see, right, all the bunch of things, the properties and everything what find, and this is your migration, which is initial create, and this should add all the things to your data. But it is still not added because you need to create another command, or maybe you need to add a new command, which is .NET EF database update. And once you hit this command, now the connection will establish, and this is going to map it to your database. And here you can see I'm getting some error here because of some SSL, so we can just go ahead and try to see what is the error. I can see one warning here which is saying that tool version is 8.0.2. so let me go ahead and check in my NuGet, and I can see all of them are quite latest, right, 0.0.5. Let me see the warning again, or maybe it could because of my .NET EF version. So let me go ahead and check the global EF version, and there it is. So I can see my EF version is 8.0.2. so I need to go ahead and update this particular thing. So let me go ahead and do that. .NET tool update, I'm updating it globally for this .NET EF version to 9.0.5. Okay, so this was successful, and now if I check the version again, so this is pointing to 9.0.5, and let me go ahead and try to again do the .NET EF database update. So build started, build success, and again this got failed, and let me investigate what is the real issue. So after doing some research, what I have found out that as we were using previously the URI format of this particular connection string, so this might had some issue while parsing this particular string. So what AI has suggested me to go with the key value format, which is something like this, where we will be having a host, then we will have the database name, the username, and the password, and we will have your SSL mode with the trust server certificates as. Okay, so let me go ahead and try this one, and let's see if this one really works. So now if I go ahead and try to use the same command .NET EF database update, and let's see what it really does. So now I can see that after using that, now this tells me a done here, which means that it has been applied successfully. And just to confirm that, what you can do, you can open your NeonDB here, and let's go inside the table, and there should be two tables got created for this particular trim URL DB. And here you can see we have our analytics and our URLs table. Now as we have our tables ready, now this is the right time for us to start with the API creation. Now if you take a look at the API what we already had for the weather forecast, so that was being done inside the program.cs file. As we are using minimal API, so this is what we basically use. We just say app.map get, there is something called as app.map post, right? We have put, then we have delete, right? So all of these is provided by us with this minimal API approach. But the problem with this is, right, suppose for example if you have to create about 5 to 10 or 10 to 20 APIs, then you will be using everything inside this program.cs file, and this can make this file so big, right? So this is one of the problem what I see if we are using a minimal API just inside a single file, which is your program.cs. So to fix such issue, right, so and to make your code more modular, what I will be using, this Carter module, right? And this will help us basically to create a proper module so that we can design our API endpoints kind of a modular way. Okay, and I will be showing you how to really use this Carter module inside a minimal API project. So let's go inside your project and open the NuGet and search for Carter, and here you can find this Carter, right? You need to go ahead and install it inside your trim URL API project. So if I see that I'm getting this particular error that hey, if you're using the CF core design, then you should have all of this package as well, then only you can go ahead and install it. So let me go ahead and copy this and search for that first, and if I click on this, right, I can install this one in my project. Click this and click on install. I also have this workspace, so let me install this as well. And now let me again try the Carter and let's see what error it gives me again. So if I click on install, and I can see that has been installed successfully, if I'm not wrong. Yes, I can see it is installed successfully, and now we are ready to use the Carter in your project. So before that, let me first go ahead and remove this unnecessary weather forecast API, which I don't need. So let me get rid of this. So to use Carter, what you need to do first thing, go over here and just say builder.services.add Carter, and you can see it is just in the bottom. And you need to also add the middleware, and to do that, just go below this and just say app.use, correct this app.use, I think it's not use, it is something called as map Carter, right? So once you do this, so now you will be able to use Carter inside your project. And now here you can see already we have this modules folder, and inside this we are going to create our module. So the first module is nothing but going to be your shortened module, okay, or shortener or trim URL module, something like that. Let me go with shortener module. And as you are using the Carter module, you just need to specify here, you need to just go ahead and inherit this Carter module, and this will ask you to implement the missing member, which is nothing but your override method, which is add route. So if you are familiar with the oops concept, then you must be familiar like what I'm trying to do here. Okay, so this is nothing but my parent class, which is we are trying to inherit it, and this is nothing but an abstract method, right? You are going to override it so that you can add your own kind of implementation inside this particular add route. Now here what you can do, you can start creating your API endpoint by saying app.map post, and inside this my endpoint will have something like this short, and here we can do something. Let me just see what AI is giving me. I'm just doing tap just to see what AI is helping me, but I don't think so it has helped me to any good extent. So let me go ahead and do things by myself now. Here what I can do, right, I can have some of my async method, and over here this will be having some of my input, and I can just say await task dot completed, something like this. Like, so inside this, right, I will be have to write my logic whenever I want to do the post. Okay, so this is kind of a quick overview like how your modules will basically look like. So suppose for example you want to create an analytic module, so you can create an analytic module, you have to inherit this Carter module, and you need to just override this particular method, and that's all. Okay, that's how you will be creating, and this is nothing but will give you a feeling of a controller based project, right, where you have a controller and all of those, right? But before doing all of this code, so let's first go ahead and create our repositories, because your repository is important, because your repository is someone who will be interacting with the database, right? So to create the repository, let's go inside the persistent, and over here we will be creating the interface. So let me create the directory first, interface, and in that I will have my first interface, and this is going to be my URL repository. Okay, so over here I can create some bunch of methods like place, let me one, right? And now there are two ways actually. Here you can see, right, we have this URL model which is going to be saved, right? So we have the save URL async, and what we can do, we can just get rid of this name and we can just say save async. This is get URL by code async, get URL by long URL, and maybe I can get rid of this URL. I can say get by long URL, get by URL code async, and this is just my get async, which will help me to fetch all of this URL. Okay, so this is my first interface, and you can see all these four controls. So if you have a repository ready, so let me go ahead and create the implementation file, and this is going to be a class where we have this URL repository class, and this class is going to implement this URL repository. And you will be asking, Shashi, why you are creating interface and all of those, because this is very important to do the dependency injection, and because in future I will also be creating a unit test cases, and there you will see the benefit of creating these interfaces, because this becomes so much easy for you to mock them, right? So this is one of my reason that I'm going with this particular approach of creating the interface. Okay, I need to implement all of those methods, and this is how things here. So the first thing, I want to save the URL. So what I will say, I'll say here that await, right, and I need to somehow get access to the DB, right, the DB context what I have created. So for that, let me do the dependency injection here, and I will say here trim URL DB context, and this is nothing but my context. Okay, and now I will be using this context here. I'll say context dot URLs is nothing but my model name, and here we can say add async. Okay, and once that is added, I will say save changes async true. And what you can do here, right, basically you can get it inside a result, and this result is nothing but if the result is greater than 1, which means the operation was successful. Okay, and that's why it will return the boolean. If the save was done, then this will return true, or else it will return false. And in this way, this will help me to save the URL. Now the second one is nothing but get by URL code. So this is going to be a very easy one. We can directly say return await. You have your context, DB context dot URLs dot first default async. What I wanted, you need to import it from EF code there on the top, and then you can use this first default async, and there you match the URL code is matching with what user is passing, and it will return. Okay, and this is nullable, so that's why you can see we have this question. Okay, now the same thing you have to do for get by long URL. Again, very easy one. Thanks to AI, this has already understand, and this has given me the code to do it fast. And the last one is your get async, and this will help me to fetch all of the records, and this is what I was expecting. So context.url.toList async, and now I can say that my repository is ready. Okay, and suppose if you want to do the dependency injection of this, right now if you want to use it inside a service, so you will be injecting this IURL repository. Okay, if you are confused, so don't be confused, let me help you with the answer. Now as we have this services folder, we will be creating another class, and the class name is URL service, and this service is going to implement that particular repository. Okay, here I'm going to do the dependency injection by injecting this IURL repository here, and this is nothing but my URL repository, and inside this I will be writing the logic to short the URL, to save it, to get it, and all of those. So now here let me go ahead and create the first method to do the short URL, right? So I will be creating pub sync task of some response DTO, which I will be creating very soon, and this is nothing but your short async, or I would say trim async, right? And this will take the long URL, and this will do the saving, and it will return some DTO, right, for us. So now as we have to return some response, right, so let me go ahead and create the DTO for it. So inside the DTO I will create two folders, URL, and another one will be for the analytics, which will come in the future. Okay, so in the URL I will have a URL response. So let me create the record for it, URL response maybe, yeah. And as this is a record, what we can say, we can just say bool, I can see success, I can get the short URL, maybe something like this. If you need, you can add a status code as well, and if you want, you can also pass some error if something got failed. So you can put an error message, and you can try to keep it as default as null. Same thing, if you want, you can do it for short URL as well. You can put a default value, and this is what my URL response DTO looks like, which I will be using inside the URL service. So let me go ahead like this, and I have to import. Now I have to write my logic here, which will help me to trim the URL. So first thing, I have to do some validation. So I will do the validating of the URL, then I will doing the trim, and then I will do the save URL, and then I will return the response, something like AI is smart, right? So now here to do the validation part, let me create a private method. Okay, so this will help me to validate the URL. Okay, so I will create static bool is valid URL. AI help me here, it is helping me somewhat. Okay, so let me go ahead and update this particular logic to have something like this, where we are using this URI.try create, and we pass in this URL, and we try to check this URI kind that is absolute, and then we send the particular result. And another check what we do here, that we make sure that this URI is an HTTP, and also it is HTTPS, so that your URL should have HTTP and HTTP. So this is very a small validation that we are doing here, so that if anyone is sending abc.com, then it will not work. So it will just go ahead and reject this particular. So this is what the first check was added, which will call this method somewhere over here, and this is what we will do, right? If this is not a valid URL, right, then we will return. So that here we can pass some status code. If you remember, right, if I hover on this, so I need to pass is success, so this is going to be false, and I think I need to rearrange this to some extent. So let me go here, that this should be is success, then I should bring this guy to the left, and yeah, this looks much better now. And now here, if it is false, then give the status code as 400, that this is a validation issue. The short URL, you will not send anything, and you can pass in the error message that this is a invalid URL. Okay, the also one thing what we can do, we can check for if the URL already exists in the database, so that we are not going to trim it again. So for that, what we can do, we can just say where URL, and if you remember, we have a repository method created, which is right, and then we can say get by long URL, and we can pass in your long, and as this is a async method, so we have await. Now we can add a check here by checking that if my URL is not null, then we can return again the same URL response by saying true we can send the URL code, and the error message anyway redundant because this is success, so we don't need to pass right now. But the one thing, if you notice here, that we are just sending the URL code, but ideally what we should send a shortened URL, and the shortened URL is consist of two things. One thing is your base URL slash your URL code, which means we need to get this base URL somehow. And what is the base URL? Like for example, our website is hosted on this https:/trimurl.com, then this is nothing but my base URL. Okay, and when I say slash, after slash is nothing but my URL code, whatever is stored in the data. Okay, so we need to make this possible. So how can we do that, right? First thing, we can store them inside your app settings. So over here we can just create a new base URL, and this will be something like this after deployment. But currently, as we are on localhost, so this is localhost 7212, if you remember correct, right? So this is what is nothing but is going to be, and now you want to access this base URL inside the service. So for that you need to say I configuration, and this is your configuration, and to get the base URL, what you can say, where base URL is equals to configuration, and you just need to pass it like this as a square bracket, and then you are trying to access the base URL from the configuration. Okay, and this base URL you can use it over here as that, right? So you can get rid of this and you can add, okay, thanks to AI, this is how it will look like. Now this was the case if the long URL is already existing, so that we are not storing a new URL, basically a new shortcode. But what if the long URL doesn't exist? So for that, what we need to do, first we need to get the URL code. We need to create a URL. So we'll say URL code, and we need to have a private method which will say that generate URL code. Okay, and this method we need to just create in the bottom, and this is how the method will look like. Okay, so we will have this generate URL code, which is over here, right? And what is this basically doing, right? So if you see, we have all the characters like small ABC, and then the capital ABC and the number, and we will be making use of the string builder. Okay, so let me import this string builder, and now here you can specify the code length. Okay, if you want to make it more secure, so the higher the number, more is secure. But as this is nothing but trim URL, so you cannot make it big, right? So that your URL code will become so big. So I think 7 or 5 is the very good number, so let me go with 7 for now. And here I am using this string builder. Okay, so now I have a string builder code, and we are making use of this random class. And what I do, right, based on this length, this we are trying to append it with the random character. Okay, so this is nothing but your chars, and based on this you are trying to select any positions which is coming random, and based on that you are trying to append it. Okay, and this logic will run for 7 times, so that your character of the string will become 7 characters. Okay, and then you are making it as toString and you return, and this method is going to generate a URL code for us, which will have it could be anything from here. Okay, small ABC, capital ABC, or 01, right? And once you have the URL code, now this is the right time for you to store it in the database. So to store it, what you will say, URL is equals to new URL, and inside that you will have few things to add, which is long URL, which is coming from the user. You have the URL code which you created just now, and you will add this created. Okay, so you have created just now, so you can say datetime.utc now, and once you have added that, what you can do, you can just say where result, and you will say await URL repository dot save it. Okay, and just in case if the result is not success, then you can say false. You can put here as 500, and you can give the error message as error saving URL. Okay, something like that, or you can say fail to trim the URL, something like, or maybe you can just keep it like this. It's up to you. You can modify the error message in future based on user's need. Okay, or else if this is not the case, then what you will say, you will return the correct URL response DTO. So put here true, then 200, and then you need to get the base URL. Okay, so what I can do, right, I can see this, I'm using it here, so I can put it on over somewhere over here so that I can access it again, right? Let me get rid of this comment. Yeah, and then I can use the base URL here the same way what I have did. So basically I need the same return to be done in the bottom, right? And I can get rid of all of this. It's better now, and let me get it. So this is what your logic is if you want to trim the URL. Okay, so this was quite easy method, right, for you to just short the URL or basically trim the URL. Now what we need to do, right, the second thing, we have to get the long URL. So what will happen, user will go ahead and send you the URL code, and based on the URL code you have to send them the long URL, or you want to basically redirect them, or anything is possible, right? So redirection should be happen from the controller level or the module level, okay? But what should the service do? Service will take a URL code, and based on the URL code you have to return the long URL. And I think this is what is actually expected as well. Or maybe what I can do, I can make it more simpler just by returning it as a string, and this will say get long URL async, okay? And based on this method, let me just try to write the logic. So what I'll do first, let me get the URL, and to get the URL you have already a URL repository method which is get by code async, okay? And here you need to pass the URL code. This is your URL, and just go here and return it as return URL dot long URL, okay? And that's all. Here we can also add something like this, okay? If we are just trying to send the empty URL, and let's see how we can handle this more gracefully once we have the module created, okay? But let me keep it like this for now, right? And now what is the other thing you need to do? You just need to get all the URLs, so that also you can do, right? So here you can have another public async task of I read only collection, and then you will just say return await URL repository dot gets async. This is wrong, very wrong. Maybe what I can say, get all, okay? This is a correct name. Go to the implementation, change it to get all async, okay? And now in the URL service you will just change it to get all, that's all, okay? And save the changes. So I can say that we have a bare minimum code what it is required for us basically to write the code inside the module, because now your module is going to call this service, okay? So let me save the changes, and let's go inside the shortener module. So now here whenever you want to short the URL, first you need to take a DTO, right, from the user. So let me go ahead and create the DTO inside the URL. So I will change it to URL request, right, DTO, right? I need to rename this, wrong, edit, rename it DTO, right? This is, I think we should have went with record, because to create a class, and this will just have one thing which is nothing but your long URL. So let me put that, okay? Semicolon, and this is what your request looks like, and this request you are going to use it here, like, okay? So this is going to come from your body, so you will say from body, right, import this, and what you can have, you can just say here as create request, that's basically a URL request dot DTO, and this is nothing but my request. Let me import this. So let's go here and import files, and then I have to use the UI service or user service, basically not iService. So you can directly inject the user service like this and go ahead and import this. Oh, that's not a user, I think that's URL service, okay? Let me go ahead and change it to URL service. Now I have everything what is required inside this params. Now I have to get the response. Wow, where response is this, I want to trim the URL async, and then I will be sending the response something like this, okay? But this will always handle the okay response, which is not the case, right? Because we can also get some error, right? For example, the status code 400 and we have this 200. So what I can do, basically I can create a switch expression. So how that can be done, we can say return response dot status code, right? And then we have this switch, and in the switch if it is 200, then we just say result dot okay, and in the okay you need to just send the response. If the response is 400, then you will say bad request. If it is 500, then internal server error, something like that. Or if we can also add a problem, right? So like problem is like, for example, if the default one, basically if nothing matches, then this will say result dot problem. You can send a response which is coming from the top. I don't know why is it not helping me. Let me copy this dot error message, and that's how you will return it. And this is what your short URL will do. Now this is my first endpoint ready. The second endpoint is nothing but app.map get. Okay, this is my get request where I want to get all the URL. Okay, so we have this URL service, and inside the URL service we can call the URLs and just we can return the response, something like that. Okay, I am doing a lot of mistake by using AI, so let me not use AI anymore. Okay, so I can say where URLs is equals to await URL service dot get async, and then I can return result.ok with all the URLs, and this is my second endpoint. So these two endpoints are ready, and now if you want to test them, what you need to do, just run the application and see that is. I'm very excited to see. Let's see what we have got. Now it is running on the port. Let's open your browser. Maybe we can check in Scalar if you want. If I refresh this, here you can see, okay, it is breaking something because as we are doing the dependency injection, but we have forget to tell it to the program.cs file, hey, that I will be doing dependency injection and I haven't defined their scope. Okay, so this was the mistake what I have did, and let me go ahead and fix them. So to fix it, let's open up your program.cs file, and here you see I haven't registered any of my services. So first thing first, you will say builder.services.add scoped, and here you have your IURL repository. Let me import this, and it's done. Same thing you need to do it for your service as well. So builder.services add scoped, and you have added your URLs. Okay, let me move it above here, and that's much it. So I have registered my dependencies, and now let me restart the application again. Okay, so this is started. Let's open up your browser again and restart. Okay, so now this works fine. I can see that I have these two short URL and this URL. Now if I try to just go ahead and test this endpoint, and I click on send request, so it's still loading, and I can see that I have empty response, right? Because I haven't added anything. And if I go ahead and try to post a request, right, so I want to test it, right? So what you can do, right, you can click on this test request, right, and here you can see that you have to specify the long URL. So let me put a long URL as kumar.dev. This could be more long, but this is what the example I have. And if I click on send, so can you see once I sent it, right, I got a response from the backend that is success is true, status code is 200. This is my short URL, and this is my error message, which is null. Okay, and just to confirm that, you can open up your the database, and once if you open up this, can you see here you can see a record that you have first entry added for this long URL, where the URL code is this, which is created at this time, and here you can find the analytics of it. Currently it's nothing because we haven't implemented that. Okay, so this is what we have implemented till now, where we have the two APIs. Let me go ahead and test the second API, which is your URLs. Now as we have added one entry, let me go ahead and test this and click on send, and here you can see I have array of response where I can see my added entry. Okay, which means both of my API endpoints are working. Now let's work on the redirect one. Like for example, if someone gives us this URL code, and if we go here and somebody does something like this, like for example, if you click enter, then what it should do, right, it should redirect you to this particular website called as shashikumar.dev. okay, if currently I put enter, right, nothing will happen, and it will give me 404 because we haven't did anything at this particular time, right? So what we can do, right, to implement that, I will be coming up with the approach where we will create another module for it. Okay, so let me go ahead and create a class called as redirect module, and hit enter, and again we are using Carter, so we will add the Carter module, and once if we use, you have to implement the missing member, which is okay. Now you can say app.map get, and inside that you have to add this pattern, which is nothing but is going to be your URL code. Okay, so this is what my pattern will look like, the URL code. Okay, and then this is what you will be using it, the URL service, and you need to import this. Let me go ahead and import that first, and over here you have to write your logic, right? So if you remember, we have created this something like where you can get the long URL by passing the short URL code, like basically the URL code. So this is what we wanted to do. So you can directly just say here that, okay, let me hover on this, and what this basically returns. So this returns a string. Okay, and this string, so basically what we can do, right, we can handle the null case here. So rather than sending us empty, I can get rid of this, and I can send this, like this can be null, or this can be a string as well. So let me go back, and now can you see, now this is a nullable string. So what we can do here, if your long URL is null, so we can say long URL is null, then I want to return not found, or else I want to do redirect. So this should be return. Okay, make sure that you have add this, and in the not found you can directly go and say that, hey, URL not found. Okay, but if the URL is there, then please go ahead and redirect to this particular long URL. Now let's apply the changes and maybe let's rerun the application just to be sure. Okay, so now application is running again. Let me open up this and we just need to restart this, and now you will have a new endpoint, and here you have a URL code. First of all, let me get this particular URL code here because we need to pass that. So I got my URL code. Let me copy this. And now if I go here and I want to test this, right? So to test it, I have to pass the URL code. Let me put it like this and I click on send. Okay, so I think so there is some mistake. If you see this, I think this is also not looking correct for me. If you see the on the top, so this also has a query param, which is wrong. Okay, so we have to make sure that we are putting it like from route. So let me go ahead and add the necessary change. So basically we have added this, right, the URL code, but here you need to just specify that from route. Okay, and you can specify the name here. You can see we have this name and you can just tell that, hey, this is coming from this URL, and I think this should do the magic for us. Now let me restart this and let's go back, run this again, and now can you see you just have this get URL code, so that you don't have those query param kind of stuff now. And now again, let me get the URL code first. So this, click on send, right? I got the URL code, copy this, and I want to test this. You need to pass it here, the value, and click on send. The moment you click on send, right, it will give you a response while sending you to this different page. Just to show you, right, I need to do that inside a browser. So I'll say localhost 7212 / the URL code. And now if I hit enter, so this should redirect me to the shashikumar.dev, but I'm not sure why is it not doing. Let me take a look why. Right, so I did a mistake because this has to be HTTPS. Okay, now hit enter, and the moment I hit enter, I am redirected to shashikumar.dev, which is what expected, which means now we have our 3 APIs ready, where we have URLs, where we have shortening of the URL, then we can also do the redirect. Okay, now we have to work on something really interesting, and that is nothing but my analytics service. So if you go in this DB, right, so here you can find something like this. So here we have this ID, we have this click time, we have the URL code, URL ID, and all of those information. So which means whenever someone is visiting our URL, we have to add an entry inside this. So let's try to work on that now. So let's start first with the interface. So here I think, yeah, I have a folder created, but I need to create an interface. So click here and select interface and give the name iAnalytic repository. And now inside this we will have 2 contracts, which is nothing but your add analytic async and get total clicks async. Okay, let me import this analytic model. Okay, so this is what we have to basically implement it inside our class. So let me go in the persistent. Now click on this class and give the name analytic repository, and here you have to just go ahead and inherit that iAnalytic repository, and you need to implement the missing members. So click on OK. So to add the analytic, what we need to do, it's very simple. You just say where analytic, right? I think AI was helping me there. Yeah, so new analytics, you need to pass the few things. First thing, what you're getting from, you need to have a URL ID and you need to have this URL code. Okay, so these two you need to pass, and then you can store the clicked time. Okay, and once that is done, you can just go ahead and return that. Okay, and make sure that whenever you have this, you need to save that. You just cannot just return, you have to save it. So for that you will use await. I don't need this because I can do dependency injection here by calling the trim URL DB context. This is nothing but my context, and just over here you can say await context.analytics.add async and then save changes async, and then you can return this. Okay, this will help me to store this particular record inside the database. And the second thing is we need to get the total clicks, right? So for that you need to have this URL code, and then I think it was really easy to get it, to be honest, and this you need to get it from entity framework, right? So this is what you need to import, then you can use this count async. Okay, so based on this particular URL code count, you can get the total clicks, basically how many times that entry is saved in the analytics table, right? So this is what my service was, and now let me just go ahead and add the dependency injection because I will be using them for sure. So let me add here builder.services.add scope iAnalytic repository, analytic repository, and that's all. Okay, save the changes, and now as you know, we have a service folder. So let me go ahead and create the service. So let's go inside the service, and over here we need to create that. Give the name analytic service, hit enter, and in this service we are going to inject the iAnalytic repository, and what this guy will have just a method, a single method here for now, and this is nothing but going to be my get total clicks async. Okay, you will pass your shortcode and you will return a number from here, what you just have now created, right? Let's save the changes, and now your service is also there. So let me go ahead and add it as a dependency injection here. So you will say builder.services.add scoped for your analytics service. Now inside your modules, you have to create a new module, and the module name is analytic module, right? And again, you need to make use of Carter module, so add that, and you need to again implement the missing member. That's all. Here you can say app.map.get, and here you need to add analytics URL code. Again, you need to make sure that you are using this from route. Let me import this, right? Yeah, and just like this you need to do this, right? And now you have almost thing done. Here you just need to write the logic to get the total clicks. So you have where total clicks, call the service, and then just return the result. Okay, to return the result, what you can do, right? This will just send the number, so you can return it as an object if you want, just by saying this new keyword, and you can say total clicks, and you can pass the total clicks, and then just save the service. Okay, let me restart this and let me try to test this particular endpoint. I can see there is a spelling mistake here, so let me go ahead and fix the spelling to analytics, right? /URL code. I think rest all looks good. Let me again restart the project. Okay, so now I have the get created, but imagine, right, there is one issue, like how we will add the analytic. So the analytic should be added whenever someone is visiting my website. Okay, which means someone is trying to click my short URL and we are redirecting them to long URL. At that time we have to add an entry inside the analytic table. So where does that happen? It happens inside this redirect module. Let's do some necessary changes inside your analytics service. So here you have to create that method which is public async task of analytics. I'm not sure if this is okay, but yeah, that's what it is. And then what you can do, you can just say return analytics analytics repository add, because what you see here, like whenever you try to add analytics, what you do, you just return the same analytics back. Okay, so it's up to you if you want to return a boolean or if you want to return exact value, right? And let me go ahead and import this missing file, and this is what it is now. Now you have this line of code as well. Now if you remember, right, as I was telling you that the main logic lies inside this redirect module. Okay, and if you remember, if you want to call the analytics, right, so you have, okay, for that let me first call the analytics service, right? And now I have to use this analytics service like whenever the URL code. So I need to change this a bit so that whenever I want to add analytics, for example, dot add analytic async, or maybe I can just say add async. This name is quite redundant to me, to be honest. So add async, because anyway that's analytics service, so add async makes more sense to me, to be honest. Same goes with here, we can just add async. Okay, let's go back and get rid of this, right? Okay, so again let's go back to the service level where we were writing this. We'll change to add async, and if you remember, I need two things. I need a URL ID and I need the URL code. So to get this with this long URL, you cannot do anything. So we have to somehow create another method inside the URL service which will take the URL code and give us the URL, right? The URL object. So let's go inside this and let me create a new method here, and this will say get by code async, and we will just, okay, the mistake, yeah, this will just do what, it will just take the URL code and this will return the URL for us. Rather than sending a string, we will send the whole URL, and this will be your URL. Okay, now let's change it. Spelling is incorrect, AY, right? And now we will be using this inside the repository. I don't know why it's explaining now. Back, I have changed this as well, so I need to change well. Okay, let me stop the waterfall, and now let's go in the redirect mode. Okay, I don't want to confuse you guys. Now you will see the magic now. So anyway, the long URL we can get from the whole URL object. So rather than doing get long URL, what we will say, URL service dot get by code async, and this guy returns a URL object, okay, which is a nullable. Okay, it's a nullable URL object. Now I can get rid of this and I can say if my URL is null, then I can just return not found, result dot not found, and here you can say URL found. Okay, but if the URL exists, then you have to add the analytics. So that's how you add the analytics, and then you will redirect by using url.long URL. You don't need to do this. This will just add it to the service. Or if you want to just to be sure that if it is not breaking and all of those, so that also you can handle it directly in the repository level. So if I go inside this, the repository level, I think they should handle it. So currently we are not handling that part. So here you can just do one thing. Okay, you can just say where result. Okay, it has to be here, not there. This and this is going to be away, and then I can just return a boolean. So result should be greater than 0, and this we can change it to a bool, right? This again we have to specify it here as well. So this is going to be a, and now this will return a boolean, so we can add it like this, and now we can just say result here, and this will be true or false. Okay, and I can add one more level. If the result is not good, so we can just say error adding analytics. So this is not a bad request. This is going to be internal server error that hey, something went wrong. So error adding the analytics. If everything goes well, then we can redirect him to the long URL, right? So I think this should do the job for us to add the analytics service. Let me go ahead and test this API endpoint. So if I go to the Scalar, and now what I want to do, I want to short a URL. So I want to test this request, I want to add a long URL as https angular.dev. Okay, and I'm sending this request. So the request was success, and this is what I got as a short URL. Now if I copy just the URL code and if I refresh, so I will have an analytic, right? And over here, if I test this, I can pass the URL code here and send. The moment I send, can you see I got total click as 0. Okay, but now what I will do, I want to grab this particular code and go on the website https localhost. This is incorrect, so there is 7212/ the URL, and this belongs to Angular. So if I hit enter, so this will take me to the Angular page. And now when I go back to my Scalar API reference, now if I go to the analytics service and if I test this API endpoint by passing the URL code, and if I click on send, this should give me 1. Can you see? Which means that the total click for this particular angular.dev was 1. Okay, and this is what I wanted to implement today, where we have seen now we have these 4 API endpoints, and by using these 4 endpoints we will be creating this beautiful UI what you see at the moment. Okay, so we will be integrating our API with this Angular project, right? And I will be making sure that I'm using all the latest feature of Angular, like for example signals, making use of RX resource, or maybe the resource API what we have just got from Angular. Now just in case if you want to see things in Swagger, so let me just do that also before I go. Here you can see that I have created this bunch of APIs today, which is related to the shortening of the URL, getting all the URLs, then get the URL by code, and then we can get the analysis. Okay, but one thing to note here that there are still some things pending. Like for example, if you go to the dashboard, right, I have 2 things here. Is the one thing is the pagination, right? Because we are not gonna fetch all the records. We want to keep our app optimal so that we are only fetching what is required. So we need to implement a pagination, and then we need to implement this particular thing as well. And this is nothing but where we implement a search, right? So we have to implement a search which is server side, and these 2 things I'm going to do that in the next part as a dedicated video. I think this video is going to be already a 1 hour of video, so the part 1 will be a 1 hour, and the next part it will be a 30 minutes where I will be showing you how you can do server side pagination and search. And in the part 3 of the video, we will be taking a look at how to create a new Angular application with the new zoneless feature and all of those. Okay, I hope you found this tutorial till now very much valuable, and if you have any questions, then feel free to leave them in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because we still need to complete this whole project, and which will be releasing very soon with part 2 and part 3, which I have already told that what those part will be including. Alright, so thank you for watching and happy coding, guys.